Good afternoon. I'm Jean McMenamin, president of the League of Women Voters, Linn County. The League is a nonprofit volunteer political organization which neither supports nor opposes any candidate or political party. The League encourages citizen participation in government and is open to anyone 16 years and older. This forum is part of our voter education efforts to help voters make informed decisions at the upcoming election. We hope that over the course of this program, you will learn more about the candidates and what they hope to do for our state. This forum is co-sponsored by the Cedar Rapids Gazette, who are providing the technical support necessary. I'd like to welcome the candidates for today's forum between Barrett Hubbard and Staed, who are running for the office of House District number 66 representative. I'll start by explaining some procedures for the forum, which the candidates received ahead of time. Each candidate will have 2 minutes for an opening statement and 2 minutes for a closing statement. The timekeeper, who is on screen, will indicate when there is a half a minute left on the speaker's time, and then hold up another card at 30 seconds. And then at 15 seconds, the timekeeper will hold up a card that says 15 seconds. Please wrap up at that point and move on, or you'll see a stop sign. Candidates will confine their statements and responses to relevant issues and refrain from personal attacks. This forum is being recorded by the Cedar Rapids Gazette and will be available for viewing at thegazette.com. It will also be available on the League of Women Voters Linn County website, Facebook, and Vote 411 site. Thanks to everyone who submitted questions for today's forum. We will start with the candidates. Mr. Hubbard is going to begin with a 2-minute opening statement.
Thank you, Linn County League of Women Voters and the Gazette for hosting this forum, where the voters get a chance to see the candidates in person who would like to spend the next 2 years being your representatives in the Iowa House. My name is Barrett Hubbard. I have a beautiful wife and 4 amazing children, ages 9 to 14, and I want them to grow up in a country where there's equal opportunity for all and personal responsibility for the choices that one makes in life. In short, where the American dream is a reality for those who put in the effort. I am a product of that American dream, as my family was on food stamps and government assistance when I was younger. Though through hard work and determination, I put myself through college and have become a civil engineer at Battery here in Cedar Rapids. There are a number of major decisions that lawmakers are going to have to address during the next legislative session. The COVID pandemic has cut into the tax revenue that was projected to come in, and through decreased spending and a loss of hundreds of thousands of jobs across the state of Iowa. How the budget gets balanced while making sure that essential services receive maximum funding possible is going to be a major challenge and will require lawmakers to come together and work across the aisle with members of the opposite party. In my current position as a civil engineer, I am a member of a project team, and we have to work together as a team regardless of ideological differences to have a successful project. If half of the team decides that they are going to just walk away and work by themselves and not involve the other members, the team is destined to fail.
Hi, I'm Representative Staed from Cedar Rapids. And I believe that being a true representative means getting to know the voters, getting to know your constituents. That means knocking on doors, thousands of doors. It means calling constituents. It means being available and approachable, attending the meetings that are important to your constituents, and to truly represent them, bringing their voice to the legislature, where you work in a bipartisan manner to solve problems based upon issues, create policy, and decide on what the spending levels and priorities are. And those have to be based on the input from constituents. And so I spend a lot of time knocking doors, thousands of doors, attending events, and making calls to make sure that I hear the roots of the issues and all of the angles. You know, some of the best decisions come from every party. They come from Republicans, independents, and Democrats. So I make sure that I go to every door and visit with everyone, because it is for me to listen and to learn before acting. And I want to thank the League of Women Voters and the Gazette for hosting us this morning. Thank you, or this afternoon. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'll start questions with Mr. Hubbard. You'll both have 2 minutes, and if you want a rebuttal, you can certainly ask for one. What issues do you feel are the most important for this state in the coming year?
Personally, I think one of the biggest issues is going to be recovering from COVID. This has been just a nightmare scenario across the entire nation. And so what's happened here in Iowa is kind of reflective of the rest of the nation. And I think it has been very disheartening how our response has been. In the past, when American people have faced an existential crisis like this, we have been able to come together as a people and put aside those ideological differences and work together to solve the problem at hand for the American people. However, in this case, it became a hyper-politicized issue from the moment it was announced. And the Democrats went one way and the Republicans went the exact opposite way. And the results have been over 200,000 Americans have died in this country alone. And that is just unacceptable. The virus is real and extremely deadly to a certain group of people. But we have completely destroyed our way of life and the economy in the United States over something that it seems have 99.8% of the population will survive. I believe that this will go down as one of the worst public policy failures in the history of our country. And it was never about the virus. It was about power and control and making sure that one group of people obtained power and control over everyone else.
I too agree that the COVID-19 is one of the critical issues we need to address. The recovery of that includes the economy. That means creating good jobs, good paying jobs. It means helping those that have lost jobs. It means helping individual business owners to make sure, because many of them are struggling to stay alive, to keep their businesses intact now. So we're going to need to develop a plan with the legislature, task force, and others involved, and in figuring out exactly where we need to put our priorities in reference to doing the best to bring the economy back. That's extremely important. But it also means equal pay for equal work. It means good wages, and it means probably grants and low interest loans for businesses to stay afloat, and even businesses that want to expand. So we need to work together in the legislature in a bipartisan method to do that. But also our health care system is going to need assistance as well. Telehealth is one of the areas that we can expand. We found that from this COVID. We need to continue to work on our mental health system and our healthcare system, make sure that everyone has affordable access to healthcare. Then the third thing is education. Our schools are going to be suffering from this as well, the additional cost for the actions that they've had to take to protect students and teachers. And of course, it's always a priority, education.
Thank you. I'm going to carry on a little. We had quite a few questions come in about the pandemic. Mr. Staed, you'll go first. What are your thoughts about Iowa's response to COVID-19? What, if anything, do you think should have been or should be now done differently?
First of all, I wouldn't want to be in the shoes of the governor with the decisions that she had to make, particularly, as mentioned already, the political atmosphere. But we need leadership at this time. We need it now. With the surge in the cases, even continuing across Iowa at the present, and more than 1,000 Iowan lives have already been lost. She needs to act more effectively. So I would call for a mandatory mask in public places. That's not too much sacrifice for individuals to act. It's not any tyranny. It's just all of us caring for and thinking for one another to take care of one another. So I think that the response needs to take place immediately. In addition to that, there needs to be more transparency. There's questions about the numbers and how things are gathered and how they're displayed. So we need more transparency in what's going on. And that thing should have been from the start. The contracts, the spending, and all the decisions that are made. So that needs to, and we need new leadership from her. And I hope we get that leadership as well from the legislature when we convene.
Thank you. Mr. Hubbard.
Yes, I agree. There have been a number of errors in the way that the data has been recorded and displayed to the public, from how deaths were counted, how cases are counted, and when those get released and how all of that comes together. So also, I think that, very early on, and this, I just attributed this to the hyperpoliticization of the virus, that hydroxychloroquine from a number of sources have been said to be a potential drug that could have been used as treatment. But unfortunately, President Trump happened to mention it fairly early on, and it seemed from that moment on, it became a no-go in a lot of places. And so I'm not sure, what doctors feel that they can prescribe or not, but I think that in a case like this, the government needs to back out of the way, and let those decisions be made between the doctor and their patient, and not even have some pharmacists say, well, I'm not even going to fill a prescription that a doctor prescribes. And so, those decisions need to be taken away from government and need to be brought down to the level where it's patient and doctor, so that the best possible care can be achieved. And hopefully with stuff like that, then we can reduce the number of deaths by, showing that, hey, yes, this does work. And if more doctors want to use it, then fine. But if patients are like, no, I really don't think that that's a good solution for me, then again, that's something that gets to happen there. On the PCR testing thing that came out with the New York Times a couple of weeks ago, I think that we need to examine the way that those are done in our state.
Thank you. Start the questioning with Mr. Hubbard. A number of vaccines are currently required for school-age children. How should Iowa handle the anticipated COVID-19 vaccine for students? Specifically, do you think the vaccine should be a requirement for students and staff in public schools? And if so, how will you ensure it's truly safer for children than the virus itself?
I do not believe that the vaccine should be required for students and teachers. We have seen across the country and across the world that the virus has very little impact upon children. And for the most part, children are not even a spreader of the virus. Now, there's always going to be outliers. You will always find a few children that die, and you'll always find a few children that can spread it to other people. But the vast, vast majority of that does not does not occur. And I've met with a number of people out door knocking that even have concerns over our current vaccination system. And, the idea of vaccines is that we get ourselves to herd immunity by using a vaccine instead of going about it the natural way where viruses and pathogens no longer have impact on us. So, the idea is that you don't have to have 100% of the people be vaccinated to achieve that level of herd immunity protection. For the most part, depending upon if you include like T-cell immunity and different things like that we've heard a lot about with this virus, the overall rate is somewhere in the 85 to 90% range. And, it varies from virus to virus, obviously. So we don't need to have 100% of the people vaccinated to achieve that, and we need to open it up and allow for greater exemption for families that have philosophical differences instead of just religious differences with vaccines in general.
Thank you. Mr. Staed.
For COVID vaccine, I think first it needs to be well tested, effective, and we really need to have confidence. There has to be widespread confidence that actually is a working, so that it works against the virus and that it's effective. And I think that that should be voluntary at this point.
Thank you. Mr. Staed, should communities and school districts be able to make decisions or have city ordinances specific to their community as it relates to the spread of the virus?
I'm a firm believer that across the state of Iowa in our school districts, we have all kinds of diverse schools, diverse districts, diverse populations, and they're all impacted differently by the COVID-19 right now. So I think that the decisions are best made at a local level, and I believe that those school districts ought to have the authority to make the decisions on how they hold their classes, whether or not they have online, and how they protect against the virus in their own communities. And that would be based on the evidence that they have and that they know about their communities. I think it would be best decided at the local level.
Thank you, Mr. Hubbard.
Yes, I agree. Local control is always the best because that is where the people have a greater control over their government at a local level, and whether that is with the school district, with the city council, or even with a state representative type of thing, you can have greater access to those leaders, which means that you can talk to them more and they can hear from you at a much greater rate. It is so hard for us to even contact and hear back from our representatives back in DC. So, if it works for the state level to have control, then obviously it works better even going down further.
Thank you. Mr. Hubbard, changing tack a little here. Should the state return to a state-run Medicaid program? Why or why not?
I do not think that the state should be involved in providing and making sure that the healthcare system works. I think our healthcare system is broken, and it really needs to be torn apart and built, have a new healthcare policy system built from the ground up that has customer focus at mind, access, as well as individuals making choices that reflect their own needs for healthcare. Personally, I kind of like a system where it even could be removed from employers providing healthcare and having individuals go out into the marketplace and purchase their own health insurance, similar to the way that we buy auto insurance and homeowners insurance now, because then that gives people more access and it allows it to be transferred when they lose jobs or change jobs or whatnot. And so, most of us have health savings accounts through our work and through our health insurance. And so even small companies would be able to provide a benefit to them in giving them a monthly stipend in their HSA that can be used to go out and purchase health insurance. So, and then obviously there are people that, are in situations where they don't have a job that could do that, or they don't then the state could come in and basically be a supplement where you could apply for a stipend from the state that would go into that HSA account and allow you to purchase your own health insurance.
Thank you, Mr. Staed.
I sincerely believe that government has a role and a responsibility to ensure that every Iowan has access to affordable, effective health care, and that they do have a role in that. and particularly for the elderly, those with disabilities, those that through no fault of their own are vulnerable to health issues that need significant health care. And so we need the Medicaid system in the state of Iowa, and whether that be private or state. I would prefer that it be state-run like it was, with more compassion and with bills paid quickly to the providers and people getting the care that they wanted. If we're not able to do that, then they need good oversight, strong, effective oversight, so that bills are paid on time to providers and that people are getting the services that require to protect their health.
Thank you. Mr. Staed, we'll start with you. Would you like to see the state require coverage of telehealth medical services after the end of the pandemic? Why or why not?
Absolutely. Telehealth has shown to be effective a way of communicating between doctors and patients, particularly during COVID-19. It is much lower cost, and we have shortages of doctors and nurses and even direct care workers throughout the state of Iowa. So this is a way to help and supplement that, to make sure that people are getting access to health care. So I think that we were on the verge of doing that last year. There were bills to do it, and I think that the COVID-19 crisis has shown that it's an effective and helpful system that we ought to adopt.
Thank you. Mr. Hubbard.
I agree. Telehealth is not it needs to be a practice that is available. And again, whether it's a requirement to use it or if the legislation allows to use it, I would be more in favor of legislation that allowed it to be an option, where again, it's that patient-doctor relationship, and those two need to decide what is best for them. And because the free market system provides for innovations that help to lower costs, and telehealth is definitely one of those things that we have seen from the COVID pandemic, that it's an innovative thing. It reduces costs and it increases access for people to receive the medical care that they require. So I definitely would be in favor of legislation that made that an option that would be covered under insurance policies.
Thank you. Mr. Hubbard, we'll begin with you. Another topic, childcare. What can the state do to improve the situation we're currently in with childcare and lack of? Do you believe there are legislative measures to help fix this, or do you believe private businesses should be left to address the situation?
I think the best thing is going to be probably a combination. It could be private businesses, but the government can kind of step in and provide things that could be a benefit. One of the things that I think we all are in agreement of, the biggest thing facing us in this arena is the lack of childcare services that are available. And so just kind of thinking outside the box, because as an engineer, that's what we do. We try to find solutions that people haven't thought of before, and who knows if they're going to work, but hey, if we can bring them to the forefront and talk about them, it might be better. So, and I've heard this from a couple people that, if we have a family that has a couple kids and they have either a family friend or even a relative that lives somewhat close, but they're willing to watch their children, but they haven't ever been through any of the vetting processes, and so they don't qualify as someone that can receive the state aid, that there should be a way to lessen those requirements because of the fact that the person was brought to the system by the family requesting the aid. So there's already a level of comfort that this family has with this provider. And so for that specific family to watch their kids, there should be a lesser requirement in vetting to be able to be a part of the program. And then obviously, if that person wanted to watch other children, then they would have to go through the complete process. But it would open up and allow for a greater number of people that are willing to be a part of the system.
Thank you. Mr. Staed.
Thank you. It's another big issue. This was an issue prior to COVID-19. But now we recognize even more fully how important childcare is, accessible, affordable childcare, so that individuals can work. Many families in poverty or other families, both parents working, it's required to in the economy, and they need safe, good childcare. So we're looking at least 3 pieces of legislation that did not pass the legislature this year, which included incentives for businesses that wanted to partnership with parents and partnership with their employees to set up childcare at their buildings or in other locations where the employees could access at a affordable cost. We also were looking at the wage issues. Once again, we know that the childcare workers, they have shortages of those, and we need to incentivize that so that more individuals will open childcare centers and get licensed to take care of kids. So it's an issue in all of our communities, I think, throughout the state right now. And the state should be looking at incentives for helping businesses and parents find affordable childcare.
Thank you. Mr. Staed, what are your highest priorities when it comes to funding public schools for the upcoming session?
Wow, very good question. First of all, we need to make sure that the spending levels are enough that they can meet the needs of their students and their districts. That is setting allowable growth at the very beginning of the session so that each district has the opportunity to plan, knowing what kinds of funds they're going to have and what kind of budget they'll have for the following year. And that needs to happen right away. And that would be the first thing. Second, we need a more stable system determining cost of transportation and make sure that school districts get equitable transportation funding. Third is there's equity in the formula. We do know they were set in the 70s, the allowable growth rate for students, for what could be spent per student cost. And at the time, there were some districts were spending more and other districts spending less. So it was set in the middle. So we have inequities in the spending on students, as much as $175 a student, and that needs to be rectified. In addition, we want to make sure that we provide enough funding to provide the resources to schools so they not only provide world-class education, but take care of all these additional costs from COVID.
Thank you. Mr. Hubbard.
Yeah, I agree. Education funding is a key component of the state budget, and it needs to be looked at fairly early on because it will provide a greater degree of certainty to the school districts across the state in planning for the upcoming budget. There's all sorts of costs associated with this, and as not being a legislator, I kind of don't know exactly how all of the different funding sources come in, like from federal and from state and from local sources that go to all of the different school districts. So I definitely think that there's probably some adjustments that need to be made, but that would be kind of a learning thing that I would have to take on and learn how all of that stuff works together to make a decision on what sources need to be and ways that things need to be adjusted for the future. Obviously, for this next school year, having different protections for COVID is going to be a critical thing.
Thank you. I'm going to continue on with school funding. Mr. Hubbard, what should be done to allow for more long-term fiscal management by school districts? For example, would you support setting a 3-year allowable growth plan to allow districts more ability to manage, or other ideas?
Yeah, okay, so this is probably one area of the school district funding that the growth plan and how all of that is worked into it that I'm not as familiar with, just because I haven't been in that sort of situation. So I would, I think as a state, we need to meet with different school districts across the board and kind of across the state and figure out what are areas within the school funding system that is broken for them and what are improvements that could be made, and So as elected, if I get elected, that would be one of the things that I would be doing early on is meet, and even probably before taking office, would be meeting with local school districts within the Cedar Rapids area to see what things could be changed and made better to give them a more stable and secure funding source so that they can plan for the future better.
Thank you. Mr. Staed.
Yeah, I agree with that. The question there. I think it should be 3 or 5 years of allowable growth out, so that we in the legislature know what we're going to need in terms of our budget in order to our schools. So we would know what the priorities are, what we need to do each and every year thereafter. And in addition to that, each year and every year, we hear from administrators from all of our school districts. We hear from the school boards. We know what the expenses are and the costs of the school districts have and how well they're meeting those needs of their students. And if we would set this on a course where all of us know what the funding is, you could make plans. You could make plans for improvements in your schools, or for keeping your teachers under contract, or adding counselors as needed, or nurses in the school. You'd be able to plan in advance. So looking at the future and knowing what kinds of funds you're going to have is extremely important. Would do so much for our school districts.
Thank you. Mr. Staed, should early childhood or preschool funding be expanded?
Yes, absolutely. Early childhood, every child in the state should have the opportunity to have preschool, to be ready to learn when they reach that kindergarten. So I think we should expand it to include others. They talk about waiting lists, that kids are on waiting lists. They're not on a waiting list. They're not 4 years old or 5 years old the next year. They're grown a year older, and they miss out on the opportunity altogether. We want to make sure that every student, every child in the state of Iowa has that opportunity. Thank you.
Mr. Hubbard.
Yeah, I think that as we get into, daycare centers and things like that, that there are things that we can do for those students that are, and children that are there, that as they progress and as they get closer to the age of, that 4 and 5 years old and getting ready to go to school, that they are, meeting certain sort of requirements, and that's just kind of built into the affordable childcare. It's not just a daycare center where you're just watching your children or watching somebody else's children. You are kind of working with them and being a parent, doing things that a parent would normally do if they were home with their children. So making sure that they are prepared and ready to go to school.
Thank you. Mr. Hubbard, schools have seen an increase in students' mental health needs and violent behaviors. What could the legislature do or should do to support students and teachers with these challenges?
So on the mental health front, I think that's, as we need to take and relook at how we classify and what we do with mental health and how that is treated, because it's becoming such a big problem across the entire state, not just with high school age or student age kids, but it extends beyond into adulthood, and it impacts the criminal justice system and everything like that. So I definitely think that mental health the whole system. Again, I think this is one of those spots where we probably need to relook at exactly how we're even doing things and try to formulate a new plan starting from the ground up that services the needs of the people of the state of Iowa. And so I would be in favor of looking at something like that and figuring out how that would work and getting a better plan in place.
Mr. Staed.
Well, I think that state could help support the partnerships with mental health professionals in each area of the state. We are way behind in our mental health system in the state of Iowa. We don't have enough beds. We don't have enough funding in crisis centers for people in crisis. And we just need to continue to work on our mental health system altogether. In reference to schools, We need access by students and parents where they can reach a mental health professional at an early in any kind of diagnosis or any kind of problems that a student might be exhibiting that indicate that there's a mental health issue. So I think that we have a good example here already with our EAs in this region of the state. They are partnering with Foundation 2, Four Oaks, others, mental health providers to help families meet up with counselors or individuals or therapists that they need, and they at least get an assessment from that standpoint where parents and the students can do that. But we have a good example right here where we have partnerships to do that. I don't think that we need to train teachers to be counselors. We need the professionals and to make sure that we support them and help build these partnerships throughout the state.
Thank you. Another topic, the environment. There has, and this will be to Mr. Staed first. There has been a great deal of talk regarding agriculture's place in mitigating climate change that we're seeing. How do you view agriculture's role in climate change? And could it be an economic boost for Iowa?
Well, yeah, they have a significant role. They have many of the answers to climate change. And that also, they also play a part in fuels, sustainable fuels, and wind farms and electrification from solar. And agriculture is big business in the state of Iowa, and they have a significant role in that in their transportation. They're reducing gases from transportation and in the use of their machinery on the farms. They also can produce products that we can use, bioproducts and other things that are good for the economy. And as I mentioned, the solar and wind energy as well, that they can use on farms in the state of Iowa. So there seems to be unlimited potential for growing that economy that works with sustainable energy as well and reduce carbon gases in the atmosphere.
And Mr. Hubbard.
So my view on the environment and things like that is that we need to be a good steward of our environment so that we can use the resources that are a part of our environment, but they also need to be protected so that they can be passed on to future generations to be able to use and to enjoy and to reap the benefits of. So as far as that relates to agriculture, it's if that, farmers and things and the ag industry feels that through an economic analysis that going down a certain path of producing more biofuels, selling off portions of their land to be used for wind farms or for solar panels, if that is in their economic interest instead of producing crops, then they need to be able to make that decision. That shouldn't be something that the government is mandating something to be done, because that drives up costs for everybody else. And instead of it being that innovative effort of an industry or of a commerce where that drives prices down and makes it better for everybody else. So I think that, yes, we do need to look at different things that can be done to be that good steward of the environment, but it's not government's responsibility, I don't think, to force an industry to go down a certain path when they're not ready to go, and it doesn't make economic sense and benefit the overall economy.
Thank you. Mr. Hubbard, what is your stance on the current bottle bill in Iowa?
Personally, I think that the bottle bill is actually an outdated sort of thing. As we've seen from the COVID pandemic, many bottle collection places in grocery stores and gas stations, they've stopped taking things for fear of spreading the virus. And when the bottle bill was first passed in the 70s in this state, it was probably a good thing because of the fact that people weren't recycling very much. Now we have a recycled can that gets picked up every week. It's a mixed use thing. I would be in favor of repealing the bottle bill completely and just having people put those cans and bottles in their recycle can. And when it goes to the recycling center, they're going to separate those things out and they'll put the bottle, they'll recycle the aluminum, they'll recycle the glass, and it just eliminates a level of government in the state that is not necessary and really isn't providing a benefit to the people or to the environment.
Thank you, Mr. Staed.
Iowa's bottle bill has been touted as one of the most successful programs in the nation. Many other states have tried to model the recycling programs after it. It's been very successful in keeping cans and bottles out of our waterways and out of our highways, sides of our highways and parks. I think it should be supported and expanded, if anything. Even right now, the manufacturers are looking for more aluminum, and it's more valuable than ever before, and that can be recycled. And so getting the cans, first of all, is extremely important. We've had some issues with the use of plastics and what we might do with plastics, but the bottle bill is still a working program. I'm disappointed that the governor and DNR have allowed the loopholes to exist recently with the COVID-19. I think those ought to be closed, and we bring everyone to the table so that they can make the tweaks that I think might be necessary, moving one penny within the plan or adding another penny. There are lots of ideas that need to be shared. So I would like this next legislative session to bring the stakeholders together and see what kind of improvements we can make to the bottle bill, because I'm open to that, and I'm sure everyone would be, to make sure that we continue with this successful program and keep these pollutants, which they are when they're in the environment, in the wrong place, and be able to recycle them and actually produce businesses. Economic incentives for that are there as well, because the products can be useful and valuable.
Thank you. Mr. Staed, what is your stance on gun control? What, if any, limits should be placed on the purchase of guns and ammunition?
I believe in common sense gun legislation. I think we have a role to make sure that our communities are safe. It's not just safe in our homes, but safe in our communities, making sure that guns and other weapons are out of the hands of people that are dangerous. So I think I believe and support background checks and keeping guns out of the hands of people that have shown to be dangerous or are imminent, or even those individuals temporarily take guns away from those people who are saying that they're going to kill themselves or harm others. So I think that there's a lot we can do to provide more safety by using common sense, safety measures, background checks. And I don't want to take weapons away from everyone, but I want to make sure that we have safe communities. And I think that gun legislation can help.
Thank you. Mr. Hubbard.
I am absolutely opposed to red flag laws and things like that, because it has been shown throughout the state and throughout the nation that when things like that happen, when government takes more control, then, you know, it's so easy for somebody to get caught in that and would lose a constitutionally protected right that they have. Now, I am all for keeping things safe, and, you know, we have a system of background checks already instituted in the state and across the nation for purchase of weapons. I think personally that we need to put more of an emphasis on personal responsibility. We need to teach in society that life is valuable and it carries value from the very beginning clear to the very end of life. And, I think over the last 30 to 40 years, we have seen a degradation of the value of life. And so people don't see that as something that, oh, if I take somebody else's life, or if I take my own life, that they're causing a tremendous loss of something that is valuable to society. And that is what's not acceptable. So I look at it from a different perspective. We don't say that, we don't blame the fork for somebody eating too much food and getting overweight. We don't blame the gun for people shooting people. We blame the people that shot the gun at somebody else. And that's where the problem needs to be addressed.
Thank you. Another question, Mr. Hubbard. Should police body camera footage be treated as public record in Iowa, and why or why not?
Police body camera footage is a valuable piece of information. I think that when an incident happens, and if that's going to go, if something needs to go before a grand jury or things like that, that at that moment in time, that footage should not be just released to the public and made a public record immediately, because that can taint the way that information is portrayed to the grand jury. And that process needs to be kept pure as we possibly can make it. Now, once the grand jury has released their findings and all of the information that was presented to them is released, then absolutely that footage needs to be released so that everybody can see everything that they were seeing. But up until that point, I don't think that needs to be released to the public.
Thank you. Mr. Staed.
Well, that issue has to do with several other factors. I mean, every police officer isn't a police officer on the street doing traffic stops. There's some doing criminal investigations, other types of work that the camera would not be something that would be of public interest right away. But in the most cases where you have an officer on the street doing traffic stops, or the routine work that a police officer does every single day, I think that in most cases that would be public information, unless there is a compelling reason why that might be withheld under certain circumstances. But I think they'd have to make a case to that, and that might be something for the courts to decide.
Okay, thank you. Changing again, Mr. Staed, what do you think, if anything, should be done to increase voter access to the polls? And would you abolish the voter ID requirement?
Well, the first part of that, I'm sorry, I missed the first part of that.
What, if anything, do you think can be done to increase voter access to the polls?
Well, I think there's a plethora of things that can be done to improve voter access to the polls. One is mail-in balloting, where everyone receives a ballot in the mail, and we're getting close to that. Also, I like the idea of having boxes that people can place their votes in. I think that we have the early voting, and I think that that's really helpful. Voting on the same day, registration on the same day, and of course, automatic registration. Everybody with a license plate or license bureaus with DMV and other agencies of the state where you could register to vote automatically. Let's see, what else? Oh, and the ID, I think the ID system was not necessary. It was something that was produced after trying to instill fear in people that there was a problem with voting when there wasn't. And it's not necessary. And I think it's burdensome for many. Even my mother-in-law, who's 96 years old, she got an ID card. But like me, where is it now? 6 months later or a year later, where do you find it? Where did you place it? And so on. And I think a lot of people, when they come up against an obstacle, they just stop there at that point. They give up and they don't pursue it any further. And so I have the ID as an obstacle that doesn't need to be there.
Thank you. Mr. Hubbard?
As far as increasing the access to the polls, I mean, we need to make sure that everyone who is a citizen of the United States and is legally able to vote has the access to vote. We have done things like motor voter registration. We have done things with sending out registration ballot or registration for people to their homes. It is up to the individual to decide how they want to vote and how they want to get to the polls. You know, I've outdoor knocking. I've met a number of people that even said, I'm not going to vote. I know I'm a citizen. I know I'm able to vote, but I have no interest in voting. So, you know, we shouldn't do something that puts a ballot in their name out there that they're not going to use, and where somebody else can get a hold of it, because it's not that everybody wants to commit voter fraud, but if we're going to be realistic, it is an issue, and it happens in every single election, and it has happened in pretty much every single election in our nation's history. And so we need to minimize that, because it might swing one way one time, but it might swing another way another time. And so we don't want somebody to be elected that did not receive the proper number of votes to win the election. So I am in favor of a voter ID card, because you have to have an ID card to cash a check, to get on an airplane, to do all sorts of things in our everyday life. So why not have an ID card to vote? It's not like you only use it once every 2 years.
Thank you. I'm going to stop the forum at this point to allow for the closing, and we'll begin with Mr. Staed.
Thank you. Thank you again to the League of Women Voters. I just wanted to let you know that I'm the 7th of 11 children. And one of the things I remember growing up was that it was extremely important that we took responsibility for things and that we cared for one another, that if we took care of one another, we could do just about anything. And I think that that's the same thing that's true in the state of Iowa. And as your representative, I think that it's important that your voice goes to the legislature and they hear what your concerns, and that they listen and that they learn from you, and that they act on those bits of information that they get from you, the voter. We represent the people of Iowa. And I think that caring about one another, being compassionate about the needs, understanding the needs of one another in the state, working together to solve the problems, to make sure that all of us are safe and secure in our homes and our communities. That's what I want to continue to do.
Thank you. And Mr. Hubbard.
Yes, I would like to take this time to thank the League of Women Voters and the Gazette one more time for hosting this invaluable resource for the voters to be able to see the candidates firsthand and to hear their thoughts and views upon the issues that affect this election. As I've been outdoor knocking, I've met so many people, and lots of them have told me that they feel that the political system is broken, that they don't feel that their legislators really are there to serve and to represent them. They feel that they elect a legislator and they go off to Des Moines or they go off to Washington and they're never heard from again. And that to me is just unacceptable. And that is one of the biggest things that is shown to be a broken part of our political system. And so I, as a representative, will be accessible to the people. I will be there to be your servant, because the voters are the ones that have the power. Lastly, I just want to close with this. Ronald Reagan said it best when he said, freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. If we don't pass it on, we don't pass it on to our children in the bloodstream. It must be fought for, protected, and handed on to them to do the same. Or one day we will spend our sunset years telling our children and our children's children what it was once like to live in the United States, where men were free. We are at a critical juncture here. With the last 30 plus years, we have taken our freedoms and liberties for granted and not fought for them and protected them or handed them on. And we will not change course now. My generation will be the fulfillment of what President Reagan spoke of. I will always support our men and women in blue who are serving to protect the citizens of this great state. And while I have the privilege of serving as your legislator, my promise is to protect your liberties and fight for your future.
Thank you. I'd like to close this forum by thanking the candidates for their participation in our democratic process. I would also like to thank the Cedar Rapids Gazette for co-sponsoring this forum and providing the necessary technical support. I would also like to thank the League Voter Services Committee members who helped put this virtual forum together, a first for us. And I appreciate all of their hard work in doing this. So with that, I think we can conclude the forum, and thank you very much.
Thank you.